How much do you think Winn-Dixie spent on that 9-year sponsorship to make a $4,000 motor?
I think the first year was $900,000. And I think over the period, it probably exceeded somewhere around $12 million.
In exchange for a few $1,000s worth of labor.
Well, I was happy. He was happy. I found in a South Carolina junkyard in 1976 ex-Denny Holm Brabham BT-8 2-liter sports racer. It had won the Tourist Trophy. It had been undefeated in under 2-liter racing. It had been traded to a guy in Greenville, South Carolina for a Volkswagen and a pickup truck and ended up in the foreign car repair shop Junkyard. And I bought it for $2,900 and I restored it and I raced it for about 12 years. And it was a fabulous race car. It was very nimble, it was quick, had a little 2-liter Coventry Climax engine, probably putting out 180 horsepower. Car probably didn't weigh anything, I don't know, maybe 1,100 pounds. I began thinking that these cars were pretty lethal in their days. You would lay down between 2 11-gallon tanks of gasoline. If someone ever T-boned you, you were going to have a bad afternoon. The coolant ran through the chassis rails, to save weight. They'd put the radiator in the front, they'd make a chassis rail, and they'd just hook the hoses up. So, you have corrosion over the years. Business had taken a downturn, and I needed to pump some cash into it, so I sold it. I also had a Shelby King Cobra I pulled out of the same junkyard, which was a Cooper Monaco with a 289 Ford V8. That was kind of a funny story. Bob Aiken and I had driven a Jack Roush car in the 24 hours of Nelson Ledges. And I had told Jack Roush I was restoring this Cooper Ford. It was an old Shelby car. And it had a 289 Ford engine with 4 downdraft Webers. And it was connected up to a Kaladi T37 gearbox. The car would kill you just looking at it. Not that the looks were good. It was good. It was designed by Peter Brock. But the car was lethal. Skinny tires, big engine. The chassis was designed for a 2-liter, 180 horsepower engine. Now we got, 350 horsepower engine. Jack Roush says, "Send me the motor, I'll build it for you." I said, "I can't afford you." He says, "You can't afford not to send me that motor. Send me the motor." So I sent the motor to Jack Roush. A crate comes in a few weeks later, and in it is a freshly dynoed 289 Ford with a bill for something like $4,000. I call him up and say, "I owe you a lot more than this." And he says, "Nah," he says, "you paid cost on the parts, and I billed out the assembly and dyno time to Ford, so enjoy your motor." So I said, "I need to do something for you, Jack." No. I said, "No, Jack, I want to do something for you." No. And he was just getting ready to go into NASCAR. He hadn't started NASCAR yet. He'd been running sports cars, came out of drag racing. And he says, "Well, I'm going NASCAR racing. Find me a sponsor." So I called Dan Davis up, who was chairman of the board of the Winn-Dixie grocery chain. And I said, "Let's have lunch." Went to lunch, and I said, "Dan, Daytona 500's coming up, and Food Lion and Publix both have cars sponsored in the Daytona 500, which is right in your market, Jacksonville, Daytona." And I said, "Winn-Dixie should have a car, and I have a friend of mine who's just getting into NASCAR, and he's looking for a sponsor. His name is Jack Roush." He said, "Well, I've always wanted the board to approve this, but I've had trouble with it." I said, "Well, see what you can do." So he called me a few weeks later and says, "Yeah, I think we got a deal put together. Can you get this Mr. Roush to come down?" I said, "Yeah." So I called Jack up. I said, "I think I got you a NASCAR sponsor." He says, "You're joking." I said, No, I got one. Winn-Dixie. And the way it works a lot of times, you'll see the name like the Coca-Cola 600. Where in a lot of cases, Coca-Cola, or the Winn-Dixie 400, so the Coca-Cola doesn't put the money up. Winn-Dixie gets their name on the race because they give Coca-Cola so many inches of shelf space at 300 or 400 stores at eye level. So there's a bartering that goes on. So in this case, it was the beef people. Winn-Dixie always billed themselves as the beef people. So the beef industry, or the association, was going to do the Beef People's Express. It had a silhouette of a cowboy with a lariat and bulls running along the side of the car. So Jack comes down, and we're in the office of the advertising agency, and Jack's sitting there, and he's nodding and nodding. He says, "I need to talk to you." I said, "Okay, can we go out in the hall?" I said, "Yeah." We go out in the hall. He says, "Look, I told you to get me a NASCAR sponsor to blow you off and just make you go away because you were insistent about doing something for me, and I didn't need anything done." I said, "Well, I got you a NASCAR sponsor. What are we going to do?" He says, "Well, I just signed a deal with Folgers, and I don't have enough people to do a 2-car team. But would Winn-Dixie considers sponsoring Mark Martin in the Busch Series. And that's how the Winn-Dixie deal went together. It went for, I think, 9 years. And Mark Martin won the series with it, with the Winn-Dixie Ford. So this racing community is pretty tight. If someone does you a favor, you always want to pay it back. And you don't ask what the payback's going to be. You just do it for them. And that was a very satisfying moment in my life, because I figured, well, maybe this is something I have a knack for. And Jack called me a few months later. He says, I want to hire you. I said, oh, that's nice, Jack, but I'm happy in Jacksonville. Got a little family company. I don't want to live in Detroit. He says, well, if you're ever looking for a job, you call me. I said, okay. I took the car to Sebring the first time when we finished it. And I went there because if something goes wrong, you got a long way to go before you hit something. And I kept getting out of that car in a cold sweat. I took it to Mid-Ohio. And I decided that if I continued in this car, I would be a dead person. It had terrible aerodynamics. In fact, although it was designed by Peter Brock, and he and I are friends, I kind of skewered the car in an article and got a nasty letter from him saying that I didn't know what I was talking about. Well, the guy who originally drove the car and the best finish it ever had was fourth at Riverside in the USRRC race, driven by Ed Leslie. And I called Ed Leslie right after I finished it. I said, I just finished your car, and I drove it for the first time. He said, what'd you think? I said, scared me to death. He said, me too. So then later, they redid the car, added a spoiler in the front and in the back, and John Morton drove it at Monterey. And John and I are friends. I said, well, John, how's the Lang Cooper? He said, scared me to death. I said, well, that's three of us. You know, it was built in '64, and that's when American V8s started being put into European chassis, and whether it was a Lotus 19 or a Cooper Monaco, they were shoveling in Chevys, Buicks, and Fords. And those chassis just couldn't take the kind of torque. And that chassis was brazed, it wasn't welded. So every time we took it out, there were cracks to mend. And I just said, yeah, this makes sense. I sold the car and made tremendous money on it. I didn't miss it. The Brabham I missed, because it was a good driving car. The Lang Cooper I didn't. The car that was the most fun to drive, I had it for 28 years and just sold it 2 years ago to Adam Carolla, was the X Group 44 Triumph TR6. That car was trick. When they built it, the rules allowed for safety changes. So that car had Mercedes-Benz half shafts. Everything had been acid dipped. All the weight had been moved around. It was a fully developed race car. And for a car with a cast iron 2.5 liter pushrod engine, it had a lot of torque. It was easy to drive. It was like putting on an old shoe. You know, you get in, just turn the wheel, and it had no bad habits. It didn't oversteer. It didn't understeer. It was all neutral. And the only reason why I sold it, I raced it 28 years. I was at the race at Amelia Island on the airport, and Ray Evernham came over for the race, along with Tommy Riggins. Great local driver. And I say great local driver, not great local. He lived in Jacksonville, but a great driver, won the Kelly Series. Really, really good. And they came up to me after the race and said, we don't want to see you driving this car anymore. I said, why? He says, you got a single roll bar, just like 1971. You got that little tiny bucket seat that only comes up the middle of the back. If you get in real trouble, you're going to die in this car. And I'd had a pretty good offer from Adam Carolla, because he collected Paul Newman cars, and this car went from Group 44 to Paul Newman. So I sold it. But one of the funny stories was we keep a few cars around the Concours office. And we had a group of teenagers around one day, and I was showing them the cars. They said, well, this is a 57 Cadillac Eldorado convertible, and this is a 58 Cadillac Eldorado Brougham, and in hallowed tones, I said, and this car, this very car, is the car that Paul Newman won his first national championship in. This little girl, about 13, looks at me and says, the guy that makes the salad dressing? I said, yeah, that's him. I wondered in the last few months when that Steve McQueen Bullitt Mustang sold for $3.8 million, if 20 or 30 years from now, anybody's going to know who Steve McQueen is, you know, and whether the car's going to be worth $3.8 million. Fame is a fleeting thing, you know.
We'd like to thank the Ticket Clinic for sponsoring this month of VINwiki Car Stories. If you get a ticket, no matter where it happens, it can have disastrous effects on your insurance premiums, points on your license, and possible suspension. So it's very important to find a lawyer that's local to wherever you got the ticket. The Ticket Clinic is a national law firm with headquarters in Florida and Texas, but affiliates everywhere, and they can help you fight a ticket and achieve the best possible outcome. They kept me out of jail in Arkansas last year, they've helped tons of my friends, and they can help you too. So visit their link in the description below for a discount.